Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss, and Kyle Brink is apparently still working at Wizards of the Coast. So that tells me that Wizards of the Coast apparently doesn't really care about what he said about how white people can't leave D&D soon enough, and similarly, they don't seem to care about his own claim that they need to have more diversity, which they actually probably do because I checked, and Wizards of the Coast has 20 executives, and all 20 of those executives are Caucasians. They're all white. They don't have a single person of color at the executive level at Wizards of the Coast. So that does sound kind of racist, doesn't it? Because if you're going by meritocracy, you probably have more diversity there, right? Because for a fact that everybody on there is white. Now, some of them might be pronoun people. I don't know. Some of them might be part of the Rainbow Flag Coalition or whatever, right? That's very likely because it's Seattle. Some of them are women, right? They're not all men. But they're all Caucasian. They're all upper middle class. They're all, West Coast, and they're all extremely leftist in name. But in practice, apparently, they don't care, right? Apparently, there isn't a single person of color in the world that Hasbro feels is qualified to be an executive at a card company. That's their point of view. Clearly, so either they're lying about diversity, or they're lying about, about caring about diversity, or they're lying about their priority being caring about diversity. It sounds like because they do have a whole bunch of diversity people, they're all just in the very lowest tier of the jobs. There are these people, these writers that do 3 pages in a D&D book for minimum wage, basically. But they can't find someone to replace Kyle Brink, which is Kyle Brink's wish. You'd think they'd do that. So, okay, that wasn't going to be the point of my video, though, but I thought I should give you guys an update on that. Update on something else, too, which is that Hasbro is definitely, in the hemorrhaging stage, because they just announced today, I think it was, that one of the people that was in the Latin American division, which is really the Brazilian division of Wizards of the Coast, has announced that the person that was the head of it, who was very much, she's this anti-Bolsonaro leftist, she, her pronouns, but in Portuguese. She announced that she and all of the rest of the LATAM division of Wizards of the Coast has been fired. They're all gone, which is so I said, there are a lot of Brazilians who watch my YouTube or who are following me on Twitter. There are a few of them that are like, hey, yeah, that's good, man. I'm like, I said like, oh, okay. So she's like, she was the problem. She's like, no, we didn't even know she existed. These people were completely useless. They did nothing, right? They were literally there for Wizards to have this image of diversity and international influence and whatever, right? Let me tell you, in Brazil, the people who are really serious role players, and there's a lot of them. Brazil has a very large population of gamers, right? We know what they like. They don't like, the stuff that somebody like this person, this ela dela, she, her in Portuguese, what she was into, right? And what any of that crew was into. And how do we know this? Well, in Brazil, it's very easy to know this because Brazil is an RPG producing country, and it's had several RPGs that were best selling within its own country. And so you look at the topics of that and you're like, no, they're not interested in stuff that celebrates Brazilian culture and then shows you a guy in a sombrero or something because which the Coast thinks all Latinos are the same, right? So all Latinos clearly wear a sombrero. I'm obviously speaking to you now with a huge sombrero on my head, and eating arepas, that's just fucking ridiculous. But anyways, they that isn't what they're interested. There isn't a single Brazilian RPG that is focused on Brazil as a culture, on Brazilian, on Latino-ness. None of those things matter to the Brazilians. What actually matters to the Brazilians? Well, the thing that they like very clearly, because you look at these games that they've made, right? Tormenta and there's one that's like a D20 variant. So they like settings that are high fantasy and slightly dark. They like D&D type games. They like Vampire the Masquerade is apparently very popular, or was at least a few years ago. Maybe it's waned a bit now. I don't know. Cthulhu was popular, and they like games about mechas apparently, because there's one of the biggest games they've got there is Defensores de Tokyo, right, which is about like guys in mechas fighting giant monsters. So like they like adventure, right, and they like fantasy, and they like everything that any other normal gamer likes. Right. This is the reality of gaming. Right. You're not if you have a gaming company and you're like, well, you know what we really need is to increase our Indonesian market. Right. So we're going to have a bunch of stuff that like we're going to play some Indonesian music and have Indonesian people in dress and we're going to hire some local Indonesian LGBT people, because one thing Indonesians clearly love is LGBT people. So we're going to hire them because everybody all over the world, right? Like if Wizards was going into Afghanistan right now, they'd be like, okay, where's the LGBT person we can hire to be our director of community services for Afghanistan, right? They try to do all this to get a group, right? Whether it's Latinos, Africans, Asians, which is just such a stupid category, right? Because if Latinos is a stupid category because there's such a diversity of Latinos, but at least there is kind of a general, very, very broad common culture, though split definitely in two parts, which is one is Brazil and the other one is the Spanish-speaking parts of Latin America, right? But saying something Asian, right? Like there was this Vice did this great, really interesting debate because they happened to have a guy there named Vince Dow who it was a debate about like it was Asians talking about the things that affect them today, right? And discussing how Asians fit in America. And they had a guy there named Vince Dow who I recommend you check out his channel, right? He's like super based Asian guy. And apparently they didn't know this, but they invited him on there and he ended up debating all the other Asians there and pointing out how they're liberal, because all the rest of them were like these millennial, hipster, liberal, third generation Asian Americans, the Daniel Kwan types, and he just mopped the floor with them. But they also had like an East Indian guy there, right? They had like, so like there is no relation there, right? Like Asia in the sense that it's the same continent, fine. But those are two completely different civilizations, right? East Indian, you can't market in the same way. Right, East Indian and Asian, right, and even within Asia, you can't market the same way to Japan as you would to Vietnam, Anyways, but if they're trying to make these kinds of arguments, right, that they're trying to appeal to a group, that's not going to work. There's only one group that will ever play D&D, and that's gamers, right? So you need to find people who are gamers and don't know it yet, or find people who were gamers and want to be it again. And you got to find people who are already gamers and are not happy with what they're playing, and you've got to get those people. You've got to get those groups. And gamers can be found anywhere. And anywhere potentially has gamers. Some places might have more gamers than others. Who knows, right? There are probably a lot of conditions. You probably can't really be, because it's a hobby, because for the most part, people who are at the extremes of, let's say, in extreme situations, right, of poverty or of war or things like that, they don't really have time for hobbies. And hobbies aren't really a part of certain levels of culture. Hobbies are very much a middle class invention and up, right? The upper class, the aristocracy has passions, and then the middle class has hobbies, because the middle class only has time to have hobbies, right? Whereas the upper class can have passions, right? Lord Byron can go off and be a poet and screw everybody from between, France and Greece, right? That's his passion. Whereas, Mr. Smith has his toy trains that he plays with on the weekend after his 9-to-5 job, right? But, the guys that are living in the on welfare and the government housing, that's really just not a part of their life, right? It's just not it's very difficult. For some of the kids, it could be, right? So like, because I know people who were from lower class backgrounds found their way to gaming at school, right? In those places where there are public schools, that there were, enough of a margin between the middle class and the lower class people that they could have a way in, right? The working class, I should say, but half of them aren't working class. They're the non-working class too. They managed to play the game, and then that in some cases was like part of their story, right? They wanted to stay in school to play more D&D, and then they like actually, bettered themselves and got out of like the cyclical poverty that their families were in and made a life for themselves. Okay, great. That might happen sometimes, right? There's an argument to be made for, I don't know, maybe you could try to bring D&D to slums in India and encourage kids to learn and to stay in school with it. Who knows? That might be possible. We're talking crazy here, but it could be. You never know, right? But the point is, anywhere that there is something resembling a middle class, there you're going to have people who could potentially become D&D players, right? Anywhere where you see that there's people who like science fiction, who like fantasy novels, people who like it. And you know what? Like, because again, Americans, one of the things about white liberal Americans, and most of the non-white liberal Americans also is that Americans have this very big tunnel vision, right? And so a lot of Americans imagine that everywhere else in the world is exactly like them, right? A lot of normal Americans. But leftist Americans tend to imagine that everywhere else in the world is completely different and usually better than America, right? And so they would imagine that if, like, for example, in Argentina, people wouldn't like Star Wars, right? Like, how could they like Star Wars in Argentina? It's the characters are white, they're speaking in English, right? They don't reflect Latino values or Latinx values. I mean, that's how they would put it, right? And all this stuff. So they would make this argument that would be an argument that would require them to say, no, what we have to do for these people is change it, right? You have to have, instead of Han Solo, it's got to be Rodrigo Solo. The Solo, I guess, still works, right? You have to have Chewbacca in a sombrero again, and because they have no idea what they're doing, they're always going to screw it up, right? And the people they're going to hire are going to be leftists. Yeah, they're going to say, oh no, but we got Latinos. They're experts. They're sensitivity and cultural experts, right? And almost all of them are second or third generation Americans. Many of them barely speaking Spanish, right? They have no idea what they're doing. Right. And even if they go to the country and find people that they think are the experts, you're going to find people that are like them, these ridiculous leftists. Because also for example, in Latin America, if you go to Argentina, you're going to find a ton of communists, right? You're going to find a bunch of people that are very leftist, but that these are communists like the old school communists, right? They're like the communists that still believe in collective farms and the Cuban Revolution and all of that, so that, like the old school Marxist-Leninists, right? And these people are nothing like the modern day type social justice warriors, so to call it, right? They're not social Marxists, they're literal Marxists. And they don't have time for this much, or they're Trotskyists or whatever, right? They don't have time for the bull crap of like a North American Yankee white liberalism, right? Like this ridiculous stuff. The white left is what the Chinese call them, right? But there are some people, usually, millennial kids who've watched a lot of TV shows imported from North America. They watched Glee, and now they believe this shit too, right? And everybody in Latin America thinks they're a joke. But those are the people that Wizards would go and hire, or that Lucasfilm would go and hire, right, or whatever. And they would hold them up as, this is our representation. This represents the average Argentinian or the average Uruguayan or the average Brazilian, right, or the average Chinese person or whatever, right? And it's not true. So all of that is incorrect. The correct thing you need to do is you look for where there's the nerd culture and you sell them D&D as it is, and you present it to them. Maybe you do a translation. Sure, that can work, but even that is barely necessary nowadays, because most of the class of people that get into D&D are also going to learn. Like I've taken up doing something here. I live in Uruguay, right? Spanish-speaking country. Now there are a good level of education, but not a great one, right? Like the average person in Uruguay does not speak Spanish, clearly, and even in the middle class, the average person in the middle class generally does not speak English. I meant to say generally does not speak English, right? They don't. The average person in the middle class, especially if they're older, will be very unlikely to speak fluently in English. And even the younger ones will tend not to be able to speak fluently in English, right? But then there are quite a significant minority that can, right? And you could probably, if you ever come to Montevideo, you could be lost here for a while. You could start asking, do you know any English? And you're probably going to find someone, if you're in a relatively crowded street and not in a bad neighborhood, you're likely to find someone who speaks English well enough that you can have a conversation within 5 minutes at the most, right? But, there's still a lot of people that don't. So I had taken up recently asking, when I notice when someone says that they speak English, and I speak to them in English first and see if they speak back, and if they're actually coherent, because there's also some people here who think they can speak English but really can't, but if they're coherent, then I will ask them, oh, are you a gamer, right? And almost inevitably they say yes. Because again, Uruguay also has a very big community. Now, gamer, when I ask them if they're a gamer, it might be a video gamer also, but Uruguay has a big community of role-playing gamers who all like, again, the favorite RPGs here are like D&D, Call of Cthulhu, Vampire, all the normal ones. There's no RPG about Artigas or about drinking mate, or not even, there isn't even one about playing soccer, right? So like, there's none of those things are, an RPG about playing soccer, I think people might try it. I don't know, but they wouldn't really give much of a damn. An RPG about people sitting around, drinking mate, right? Like what they want is to play in the Forgotten Realms or something like that, right? Or the World of the Last Sun. Yeah, take your pick. World of the Last Sun's probably more fun, but but the people that are gamers will tend to learn English because they'll want to read the rule books, and they're going to want to be able to understand everything without having to get a translation. So even a translation is kind of optional, like it's really simple to do this. And the problem is that as long as Wizards of the Coast and people like Kyle Brink are still thinking in terms of the color of people's skin or ethnic content, and as long as they're still making this stupid stuff, like we're going to have these sensitivity readers check every single word to see that it's not racist, right? Because that we know that if we're just not racist enough, then suddenly 100% of Black people will buy D&D, and then we'll have won. That'll have proved it. It's a fantasy. They're living in a fantasy world, right? They're ironically, it's the only fantasy world they've really got because they've never been able to design one themselves. So they're living in this fantasy world where they think that the focus on ethnicity is what matters. No, the focus has to be on the type of person who will play D&D, and that person could be any color. And they can be, whatever appearance. They can have any gender. They could come from any political affiliation, for that matter. There's none of those elements matter. And until they learn that, they're not going to make as much money. If Cynthia Williams wants to monetize D&D better, that's the first lesson she needs to learn, right? There are the type of person who's a gamer. That type of person is not based on skin color, not based on ethnicity, not based on not necessarily based on gender. There is some gender variance there because I think men are more inclined to gaming than women, right? But it's by no means an absolute, right? There is some variance based on social class. That's not because of some inherent factor of birth. It's because the social class in which you live in affects the free time you have and the type of interests you can be exposed to, right? So even there is some leeway again. Right. The main thing that matters is to understand that type of personality that is going to enjoy the escapism of RPGs, the fantasy, the action, the adventure, the mechanics, right? Because so again, it's people have to have a certain level, not a huge level, like obviously, but they have to have a certain level of intelligence to be able to understand a game like D&D, as opposed to, say, checkers, you know. And those are the factors that they should be looking for, and then learning how to promote for that. And then you can promote that anywhere in the world, and you will get a potential market. Anywhere in the world that Star Wars or Game of Thrones, stuff like that, Lord of the Rings, or even Harry Potter, anywhere that those things have been successful, there's a potential market for role-playing games. There has to be, because it's the same type. It's a type of person. It's not about a culture and ethnicity or anything else. So I guess that's everything for today. If you like this video, please share it anywhere that you think people find it interesting, or anywhere you think it'll piss people off. And if you want to help me out, you can check out my products. Now, I've got here World of the Last Sun, but which I certainly recommend you check out. But I only have it here as a placeholder right now, because what I'm really trying to tell you about is that as of this weekend, the Gonzo Fantasy Companion has come out. That's my second weird fantasy book. The first one is World of the Last Sun. Gonzo Fantasy Companion is not a setting. World of the Last Sun is. The Gonzo Fantasy Companion is 232 or 23, I forget which one, 200 plus pages of random tables, generators, monsters, magic items, underground complexes, robots, high-tech items, psychic powers, intelligent animals that you can make into player characters, mutant player characters, weird fantasy races that you can generate randomly, all kinds of stuff. Even the kitchen sink is in there. So it's just packed with information and tables and generators that you can bring your weird fantasy into your campaign. You can bring whatever, you can pick and choose what you want and put it into the campaign. And you should totally check it out, because I think that you're going to really enjoy it. Okay, so check out the Gonzo Fantasy Companion. Check out World of the Last Sun if you haven't yet. Check out Lion and Dragon and the Invisible College and Sword and Caravan and Star Adventure. All the links are in the description below. And again, spread the word. Share the video. Thank you very much.